Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Well, hello again, everybody. It's your host, Joe Slepsky. We're back for another episode of Joe on Joe. This is the podcast where I've covered every episode of Sunbow, the cartoon, every episode of the DIC stuff, every issue of the Marvel Comics Real American Hero G.I. Joe series. Basically, if you're new to the show, it's traditionally a watch along or a read along show. So, if you want to watch a cartoon with me, find that episode, turn it on YouTube on the G.I. Joe channel, and listen along, and I'll watch it with you. If you want to read a comic book with me, pick up that comic book, and I will read it along with you. That's kind of the concept of the show from the start, and I don't think I say that often enough. I just talk about, we talked about it, but that's really what the show's designed. It's designed to be evergreen. It's not designed to go, week by week. Here's the latest G.I. Joe news, because that news is done so much better by so many other great podcasts out there, which brings me to our first point of the day, which is last week it was brought to my attention that Joe on Joe was featured in the Feed Spot Top 5 G.I. Joe podcasts. And Joe on Joe rolled right in at number 2. And I want to thank every one of you listeners, whoever voted. I have absolutely no idea how they voted on FeedSpot for that. But I want to thank all of you that did for voting Joe on Joe the number 2 podcast. Now, it might be measuring listens, or it might actually been a voting thing. To be fair, I don't know. However, what I do know is that the people at FeedSpot reached out and brought it to my attention. They were very kind. Certainly not. I don't know much about FeedSpot. I don't exactly know what it is, but from what I can tell, it's kind of a subscription that collects all of your podcasts, YouTube channels, news feeds, anything, all those 15 different ways that you want to get your information about the things you love, and it aggregates them in a website, or I'm sure they have an app that makes it easy for you to listen to. There's, it's a subscription. I don't know. I've never used it, but they were kind enough to point out that apparently I ranked number 2 last week. So thank you, FeedSpot. I appreciate you. And what's really hilarious then is apparently I got to get on my game, because while I was number 2 last week, this week I was beat out by our friends over at What's on Joe Mind. They're number 2 this week. And number 1 this week is The Full Force, which is another fantastic podcast. I think last time when I first saw it, when I was 2, I think Talking Joe was number 1, maybe. I don't exactly remember it when I saw it, to be honest. But now Talking Joe's at number 4, and they're all great podcasts. And the Audible podcast, a G.I. Joe podcast, Audible Interlude, a G.I. Joe podcast, is rolling in at number 5. So I'm in fabulous company. How dare you, Mike Irizarry of What's on Joe Mind, supplant me as number 2? There will be hell to pay. I will have set my sights on regaining my position. But it is awesome. So it was great. So it's a lot of fun. So yeah, check that out. Check it out. If you use it, thank you. And if you don't, awesome. And Mike Irizarry and Ragtime Rob and all and everyone else over there at What's on Joe Mind, I'm coming for you. I'm gunning for you. Look out. It's happening. The other cool thing this week is I want to send a big shout out and thank you to any listener, all you listeners who reached out with supportive words for Rebecca, aka Toilet Teal. She's feeling great. She finished her radiation on Monday of this week. All the signs are pointing to great, and the outpouring of love and support has been amazing. We got notes from a bunch of people. Martin, thank you so much, which we're going to talk about Martin and more in one second. Of course, our good friend Scotty, and just a lot of notes from people. So I really appreciate you guys giving support and love to Toilet Teal, who has given a lot to this show, even stuff you guys aren't aware of. She's contributed a lot behind the scenes with creative ideas, and she's always a force and a presence. So it's wonderful to hear. So thank you all so much. So I mentioned Martin. It's a new friend, Martin Day. You're awesome. You reached out from the website, which listeners, if you want to reach out and find me, you can do so on social media at Joe on Joe Pod. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Very easy to find me there. You can send an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com. I do have a website. It's joeonjoe.com. I don't usually send people there. It's not super, it's not super fancy or heads up, but it is a home for it. And I believe that's how Martin reached out. And, you can also check out our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/joeonjoepod if you want to help keep the show running. It's always appreciate and love our patrons. So Martin reached out with an absolute banger of a note about Action Force. So every week I've been covering Action Force, and I'm really enjoying it. But as I said at the start, I'm a novice, so this is all new to me. So I am learning as we go. This week we're going to be talking about Death Beam, which is the second G.I. Joe story in the 1986 Action Force Annual. It's really a lot of fun. And Martin brought to my attention this really great website called bloodforthebaron.com. And again, you guys who already know all about Action Force, I'm sure everyone's aware of this, but I know there's a lot of you guys that don't. So I'm going along with you and learning this on the go. So bloodforthebaron.com, it's basically a Wikipedia for Action Force. And it's got a lot of great links to some of the other traditional G.I. Joe wiki sites, 3D Joe's and GIJoe.com and all that, or, what's the one? YoJoe.com. That's it. But it's got a ton of information, absolute ton of information about all the Palitoy stuff and all the Action Force stuff. So I've not even begun to dip in here and read and learn and things like that, but it is a really great resource. So check out bloodforthebaron.com. And conversely, our friend Scotty Cameron, he sent a bunch of good information about it. I don't even think I can summarize it, but like Scotty knows a ton about this stuff. So this is really great. He talks about when Hasbro did the American Hero. That's when Palitoy changed what was used to be Action Man, which was the 12-inch stuff. They changed it to Action Force, and then eventually they they dropped the battle part of it, and it was a I guess Battle Picture Weekly comic book. Like there's a lot of details here that it's really, really cool. I really, really appreciate Scotty sending me this note. It's a total rabbit hole. He actually calls it that, and that is exactly what it is. He went down it apparently back in high school. So this is new to me. I'm a few years past high school, but I really, really dig it. So, So we're gonna plow ahead and just keep doing these stories as we do them on this show, which is page by page, panel by panel, and see what we learn about Action Force as we learn it. I'll tell you one thing I do learn a lot about is I learn a lot about movies, and I do learn a lot about movies by listening to our great sponsors podcast, the Movies in a Meal podcast. In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then, a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies in a Meal podcast. The Movies in a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These three friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews, they do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies in a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies in a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too. I saw a couple things this week. First of all, there is a musical in theaters called Dick's the Musical. I know we don't normally swear on the show, but that is the name of the movie. It is ridiculous and hilarious and absolutely fun. It's a limited release. It's a smaller film, but if you have an opportunity to see it, it's definitely not for kids. It is. It's really funny and really ribald, and Rebecca and I absolutely adored it. And the other thing we watched this week, which either of us had seen in quite a long time, man, we watched Eddie and the Cruisers last night. I'm just saying, Eddie and the Cruisers, amazing. Eddie and the Cruisers Part 2, not amazing. What a great movie the first one was, full of mystery and just like nostalgia and, you know, what could it be and what a great ending. And then Eddie and the Cruisers Part 2 comes along and is not that. So we watched them both back to back last night, and we loved Eddie and the Cruisers. And yeah, it was great. So I'm just throwing that out there because that's not a movie people talk about a lot. So if you haven't thought about Eddie and the Cruisers in a long time, go check it out. It's so good. The music's so great. The performances are really solid. And it's just, and I saw things in it that I never got when I was a kid, because I was one of those kids that saw it a million times on HBO. And for example, I never understood when I was a kid watching it, I never understood what was going on at the college scene between Tom Berenger and Eddie, and that Eddie wouldn't introduce him. I knew he wouldn't introduce him, and I figured it was just him clowning on him. But now as an adult, I see it and I go, oh, that Tom Berenger's character, Wordman, just all he wanted was to get recognition at his school, and that's all that would have made him happy and made him satisfied. But Eddie was upset with him for making time with his lady, and so Eddie consciously kept that from him, and he punished him. He took the reward for even playing at his alma mater away from him, and that scene just hit so much more. When I was a kid, I get it. I was like, oh, he embarrassed him by pretending to know him, but seeing it now in those eyes, I was like, oh, I see what's happening. Also, spoiler alert. The whole movie hinges apparently on Eddie's complete grieving over the death of his saxophone player. I can't remember his name, but he was great. But it's like that happens, and Eddie's like, "That's it. I'm done. Life has no more meaning." I'm like, that's so weird. Anyway, it was great. All right, enough Eddie. Hot, timely Eddie and the Cruisers talk, and we're going to talk about Death Beam this week. So, after that story last week, the full color story Cobra Gold, there is an 8-page story called Johnny Red, which is lushly illustrated. It's really gorgeous, and it's primarily about a fighter pilot squadron who they think they know there's a traitor in their ranks, and they one by one the traitor gets everyone else killed in the sky until you're left with just the traitor and Johnny Red. And Johnny Red figures out that he's the traitor, and so he meets his death in the sky. So it's one of those cool little, war story comics, which is why I never considered G.I. Joe a war story book, like a war comic. They're always like little parables, little bite-sized parables. They start and they finish. There's not a lot of drama. There's a little bit of continuity crossover. I'm thinking like Sergeant Rock stuff and things like that. But for the most part, it's a dramedy. It's a little teleplay that happens in 20 pages, 8 pages, however long it is, and it starts and it finishes, and it always has a nice little button. It's a parable, and that's the case here. And G.I. Joe's never been that. G.I. Joe's never that for ever. Like I've touched on this. I remember touching on this before during one of those comic books, or during one of the like JoJo Illustrated episodes. That's not what G.I. Joe is. So that's why G.I. Joe is not a war comic at all. G.I. Joe is a superhero style soap opera. It should never be lumped in with any war comics, and frankly, I don't think anyone is running to do that. But it's an interesting difference. And so, as with Action Force, with these Action Force stories, they actually are playing out a little bit more like the traditional war stories and the war comic book genre. That we were certainly seeing at the time, and we're a predominant part of the comic book world in the 50s, 60s. I mean, they were big through the 70s, and they died out. They all died out in the early 80s, really, as superheroes kind of swallowed up the entire genre. So then we also have a one page of a joke page, and there's some good stuff on it. The whole thing is packaged together like a Mad magazine thing. Different styles, different short stories. Here's a page of jokes. Some of these are terrible, but some of them are kind of funny. There's a guy on a tank. They're in the middle of some city, doing a siege in a city, and one guy's manning the tank cannon, and the other guy's hanging out, coming out the front hatch to pay a parking meter. That's kind of charming. There's looks like some kind of lieutenant or something getting mugged in an alley, and the gun's in his face, and instead of being afraid about being mugged, the lieutenant is screaming, "That barrel is filthy and you need a haircut," to the mugger. They're just a cityscape. And there's a guy on a prison. Actually, this is funny. This is actually time to bring this back to G.I. Joe. There's a guy on an island breaking out of a jail cell, and there's like the joke is that he doesn't know that he's on an island, so he just broke out of a jail cell, and now there's sharks in the water. He has nowhere to go. It's not a very funny gag by any stretch of the imagination, but this jail cell island thing is very reminiscent of the bunker that Quinn and Snake Eyes and Dr. Venom got locked in, and when that exploded and got sent to the bottom of the whatever body of water that was in South America. So that's kind of that reminded me of G.I. Joe. But we're here to talk about Death Beam Action Force. Now, it is a black and white tale, lushly illustrated. Again, I don't really have the creators on this stuff. Although, as we're speaking here, I just realized maybe they do on this great Blood for the Baron website. So, no, they do not. Nope. They actually have PDFs of the stories, though, so that's pretty cool. But from what I can see, there's no extra information on this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, there's no additional info that would have been, that wouldn't have been in the comic book itself. And that's the problem here, is that the comic book itself doesn't have a lot of the creator information in it. So I'm looking at Battle Action Force. So it's what's really cool though is it's got really great PDFs of these stories. So go to this website and see if you can. I actually can't find, as we're speaking, I can't find the annuals that I'm reading from, but they've got really great PDFs of the actual regular Action Force comic books. So huzzah to that. That's really cool. So yeah, check this out, bloodforthebaron.com. It's going to be a resource for all this stuff. We'll see. I'll see if I can find the actual, these annual stories, but I don't see them off the top of my searches. Anyway, but it's lushly illustrated, very reminiscent of Kurt Swan style. So it's very clean lines. But speaking of Mad Magazine, it does have it's done in that grayscale tone shading that a lot of the Mad Magazine movie parodies would have. So I know you guys can picture that, because Mad Magazine was printed on newsprint, black and white interiors for the most part for many, many, many years, and they would when it came to doing a lot of the movie parodies, they would do gray tones to give it more depth, to make the caricatures and the drawings of, quote, real people come to life a little more. That's the style they're approaching with this specific story. I think it works really well. Really clean lines. Really, I said Kurt Swan because when I think of Kurt Swan, I think of solid anatomy, not a lot of comic book flexibility to the characters. They tend to move like a human being would instead of like a comic book version of a human being. If you can think of Todd McFarlane as the antithesis of that, where he would put Spider-Man in every contortion possible. Kurt Swan, very much the opposite of that. So that's what we were getting here, and I think it looks great. They're very on point as far as like being toy accurate. There's a Cobra Fang in here. There's a Wolverine in here. And there's also my first meeting of it's rock and roll, but it's not rock and roll. His name is Ton Up. That is what they rebranded rock and roll. He was the Wolverine driver. So Ton Up makes his debut appearance on Joe on Joe, and I'm here for it. So it's Death Beam. It opens up. There's an American power station, and it looks like there's giant birds circling overhead. So could they be pterodactyls? No, they're cobra claws, led by Cobra Commander himself. So Cobra Commander's out in the field getting his mask dirty, and they attack this Cobra power station and they take it over. So very soon there's an incident. And it's a real quick takeover. There's one panel of explosions, and then the next thing you got. It's very economical storytelling. This whole thing really is. Next panel jumps to the scientists are wrapped up in ropes. The Cobra soldiers are giving Commander a briefing. And then just like Cobra Commander does, and this is why it's very cartoon-esque, he calls the G.I. Joe team. So he commits a crime, he commits terror, and then he's like, literally says, activate a satellite link with Action Force. I'm sorry, Action Force. He calls Action Force. With Action Force headquarters. So he has to brag about it, right? So he calls them. He says, we've occupied this plant. High explosives everywhere. You have and he's doing the hiss S again. Precisely 30 minutes until detonation. What's great about this scene, this panel, it's Cobra Commander on TV, and it's there's Ton Up there, and there's Stalker and Gung Ho. And I think those are their continued Action Force names, and it's Duke and Scarlet are the prominent characters. Duke's all the heads in this actually are a little large. They're a little too large, which makes me think they really were working with the action figure first. You know, they really were going from the action figure, where I think some of those, you know, like some of the heads were a little bit. You know, if you were drawing it naturally in a comic book, you probably wouldn't have this. But they really look like toys. But let's be clear here. Cobra Commander makes no demands. That's what I'm saying. He just says there's explosives. You have precisely 30 minutes until detonation. And that's it. Next page. 25 minutes later, Duke is rolling up in a Wolverine with Ton Up driving. He calls to the Sky Striker Action Force teams. They've landed. The teams have landed. They're ready to advance. What can Scarlet? So apparently Scarlet was because she was in the last issue. I believe she was up in the Sky Striker too, right? So she's a Sky Striker pilot. She just sees a bunch of people tied up. The artwork on this is really great, and frankly, the panel work is really nice here. So more than I think I would have expected for, I don't know, I guess for UK comics. I mean, you know, again, learning, but there's a lot of panel breaks. You know, in the spirit of Steranko and Neil Adams, you know, like there's on this page alone. First panel is kind of standard, but they give it a little. There's a little cockeye angle to the edge, and then the next panel is borderless, for the most part. It's got no up and down, so that really opens the page up to the next panel, which is no panel at all, and it's just the Wolverine busting through a fence. And then there's a circular insert that's really nice, and all these changes in in panel layout and stuff. How it works visually is that it transports you through time quite a bit, really fast. So you go from they just landed to they're all driving in, they're busting over a fence, they've already freed the guys, and in the insert, comically, Tripwire shows up. That's pretty great. The guy says, "That's your bomb disposal expert?" Huh? Question mark. Tripwire's the best. Just seeing him a bomb calms him. Now, speaking of Tripwire, real quick, I got my Tripwire in the mail this week. This is timely. Boom. Mail call, right? Tripwire with Aspara and McLeod. That's a good looking figure. I like it quite a bit. I never had Trip when I was a kid. I got him recently, the last few years as an adult, and I love him. I think I always enjoyed the look of the figure. I think he's great. So I was excited to see this figure, and he looks really, really good from the classified selections. So then we jump to this next panel, which is like a triangular rectangle. You know, like it's like a rectangle with odd dimensions to it. But the way that the top panel is slanted, it matches the angle on the Wolverine above, but it also works as a pull down from that circular panel on the right in the middle of the page, right? So it really, this circular panel, strangely, I'm going to get real European here, works as a roundabout. If you're talking in driving terms, it works as a roundabout. You read that panel, and then you kind of circle back and go back to the to this panel, this oddly shaped triangular panel in the corner here. So it flows nicely. And in the reactor room, Tripwire is trying to defuse the bomb, etc. Then suddenly, Tripwire gets it, and he says the trembler fuse is disconnected, but not the time fuse. So here again, he throws it to Gung Ho to catch. Gung Ho does not know anything to do with it. So we'll go to the next page. And Tripwire just says, "This is. I don't mean to be. It just all sounds so very British. I love it. Like he says, I suggest you throw it in the sea, my friend. You've got at least 5 seconds." So Gung Ho goes running out and throws it into the dirt, and he hits the ground to take cover and everything. So this panel actually looks like he's dead, but he's not. He's taking cover, and he says, "Made it with 1 second to spare. Remind me to pulverize Tripwire for this." And what that bomb was, it was just a like a detonating fuse, right? So it wasn't the actual bomb that was going to blow up, but it still was an explosion that would have killed everyone. And this page continues this great panel layout choice, because they work the panel to match the angle of Gung Ho. So they want to get Gung Ho into a running, moving action, but knowing that if you used a flat, straight, regular panel, there would be a lot of empty space taken up. So where his right leg is extended out, like that he's launching off from, right? He's launching towards the distance. The panel just wraps around his leg. Like it just says here. So it's as if he's using the panel itself to propel him forward. Then you get the insert, of him laying in the dirt. Moments later, Cobra Commander's on TV again. He says, "Glad to see you made it in time. It was only for starters." He's got a real challenge now. He says, "This massive Dutch dike protects thousands of people from the sea, and Cobra is going to smash it." So Duke says, "Well, that's all we need to know. Duke, to all units, prepare for immediate departure to Holland." More nice panel design breakups. And this bottom left corner one is it's another open panel, which works as it's like a bookend to the previous pages. Open panel up top and in the middle too. It's nice. Now we got the G.I. Joe whale, the hovercraft, and the whale looks great. Like that's the thing. All the figures look great. Like everyone's got their backpack, everyone's got their toy helmet on. Like it is so toy. It's dynamite. So they're at this Dutch dike, and the Sky Striker's overhead. They see some mines, and there was an asp, Cobra asp, that was hidden. So all of a sudden they're taking fire. On the next page, in the next moment, the Sky Striker blows up the Cobra asp. I like this use of the asp. I had an asp. I always thought that was cool. But that a toad always bothered me because it couldn't really move anywhere without another vehicle. If you were, if you were being authentic like I was, I don't know how you rolled. But again, more panel breakups, and it's just they're fun rectangles cut out to match the action that's happening in the scene, which is something that I would say American Comics didn't do a ton at the time. Like we mentioned, the Neil Adams and the Steranko stuff, but that's because those were exceptions, right? This style is really irregular. That's the difference here. So certainly American Comics, they were breaking panels and they were doing, this is 86. So, we had Frank Miller, we had Walter Simonson, Byrne, like doing different panel layouts. But what I'm seeing on this page, I hope I'm describing, is that they're just irregular panels, but they're irregular to match the action, not irregular to pretty a page. I think that's the difference. American comics tend to, when they do the like panel artwork, it's to make the page look like something bigger than the sum of its parts. That I don't think is what's happening here. I think it's what's happening here is the action is denoting the panel size, and so that makes it a more interesting page to look at, but not necessarily a page as part of the story. I hope that made some sense. I think it does, and I feel good about it. But we get the whale in action. It's spinning around. Cobra hyenas show up, and hyenas are the rebranded Cobra Hiss tanks. Someone is screaming, "Eat hovercraft, Cobra." I think that's Duke. Yeah, that looks like Duke. Really nice, like grayscale shading on this. I don't know if they did this with marker. It's not Zipatone, although there might be some. No, I mean it looks like old school. Maybe they used marker or just literally like charcoal pencil to do it, but it's really great and it gives nice 3D effects to everybody. So they beat these Cobra hyenas. They drive them back, and they say they still got a big job to clear them. There's minefields. They need to set up a command center in case Cobra attacks again. So now Duke finally says what we've all been wondering: what does Cobra Commander hope to gain from all this, Scarlet? And she's she's at a loss. She says, "Who knows how that creep's mind worked, Duke?" And we got Cobra hovering overhead, and Stalker, who's checking out a neighboring like Dutch windmill, he spots. Turn the page. Zartan, quote, "that color with a U, changing freak in his chameleon swamp skier. He's been watching the Joes the whole time." And he says, "Do you want me to take him?" And Duke says, no. Like, don't let him know you saw him. He says, "Duke to all units, Zartan has us under surveillance. Act normally." So now we get a little bit of a mental image of Duke giving us some narrative of who all the Cobra bad guys are, really. He's like, what happened to Cobra Commander's main allies? Major Blood, the Baroness, Destro. They're always where the action is, but they're not here. And there's pictures literally in Duke's mind of Major Blood, Baroness, Destro. Stalker updates us. Zartan's moving. He's collapsing his chameleon and putting on a disguise. So again, very toy-centric. They're using the toy thing, which, remember, the chameleon came with the towing box for it, which I always forget. I always forget that he came with the chameleon, and two, I always forget that the chameleon could be broken up and put away so that it itself was in disguise, which is such a brilliant idea. So now Zartan's dressed up as a crazy old lady, just old Dutch lady pulling a basket of scrap through the field. And he's getting clear to use the radio. So Duke says, all right, we're just going to listen in. So Zartan calls. He says, Action Force is working to clear the dike as planned, Cobra Commander. So excellent. As long as they're running around the ground, they'll never think to look above their heads. And that little bit of spy on the next page takes us to space, where Duke picks up a newspaper and realizes, of course, the orbital power station's due to start deploying today. That's Cobra's real target. So now Breaker wants to know, what do we do with Zartan? Don't look now, but Zartan's by the... Oh, so they're out in a field, and there's no one else around but the Joes and this old lady. And it's like they're avoiding the fact that this old lady is in the... You know what I mean? Like, it's not... Sure, he's dressed up as someone else, but it's fairly obvious that you're out there to look at the G.I. Joe team. However, Duke tells him to do some target practice on this car that Zartan's standing by. Again, a random abandoned car. And then there's a fun, very Mad Magazine drawing of Zartan on his 100% toy-centric swamp skier escaping this exploding car. He's even got his backpack on, the one where he kept his fake face. Yeah, this is great. It's so Mad Magazine. I love it. So now we go into We just jumped to space. Now we're in space. And I love that. It's just, that's it. There's no like, how are we going to get into space? It's just, oh, we're in space. And we're introduced, at least for me, they might have been an Action Force already, Moon Dancer. A Moon Dancer is a dude. Later on, there's later in this, there's a color insert of all the toys. And Moon Dancer flies the Triad Fighter, which is the outer space ship. It's like looks like some kind of weird Fantastic car, but with only 3 pods. It does not look like any kind of G.I. Joe vehicle at all, and it appears to be Grunt, or maybe like Steeler's body with Grunt's head, that makes up this Moon Dancer dude. So Moon Dancer is flying them into space, and it's Duke, and I'm not sure if we know yet who's in the side. Oh, and Cobra Commander, Cobra stole a space shuttle last year, and that's how they got it into space. So it's good to know Cobra's on the cusp of space shuttle theft. And here we go with a Robo Skull. Now this is Robo Skull. This is pretty awesome, and this probably, I feel like I've seen this before. Well, I mean, I know I've seen it before, but I feel like this might be the most popular image from Action Force that's kind of bled over, because it is literally a giant TIE fighter with a skull instead of the pod. That's what Robo Skull is. I'm going to pause this. All right, I just called up the Robo Skull page, guys. It's awesome. It comes with a dude called Red Wolf, who is in this comic book. Think of a TIE fighter, but instead of the wings are also the landing pads, which I guess TIE fighters were too. But they've got it pivots so that the feet of the landing pad becomes the propulsion for this skull-faced TIE-looking pod. The eyes have guns. This is great, and I'm here for it. Robo Skull is really awesome, and it flies in the sky. The head pivots. Lasers abound. There's a canopy up top that looks very, very TIE Fighter-ish, very Star Wars-ish. It looks like there's a battery component, so it might have even lit up and made some made noise or made lights or something like that. But that's really, Robo Skull's pretty cool. So we have a Robo Skull attacking the Joes. And Moon Dancer, it says, undoubtedly piloted by my old enemy Red Wolf. Leave him to me, Duke. You and Scarlet, that's who else is in the pods. Blast off. Your job's on board the power station. So again, more panel hijinks. Really cool. They get into the airlock. Welcome aboard, Duke and Scarlet. Surrender or die. Cobra Commander's there with a bunch of Cobra troopers pointing guns at them. But they don't surrender. They fire their weaponry, collapsing this walkway. And actually, is that the Baroness? No, yeah, that is. It's actually the Baroness, not Cobra Commander. So the action's happening. Like, Cobra can't even pull off an ambush properly. And Scarlet and Duke are now running through the Cobra headquarters. They run into Major Blood. He says, drop your weapons, we'll blow you to pieces. Meanwhile, Duke finds the artificial gravity control lever. Now, why you would have one of these, I don't know. We'll have to ask James Bond. We'll have to ask Goldfinger. And didn't they do that in the Austin Powers stuff? Why anyone would have just one lever that you pull it and you turn off gravity, I have absolutely no idea. But it's there. And Duke found it, and he turns it off, and everyone starts floating, but then Duke turns it back on real quick, which is great, because he and Scarlet had braced themselves. So all the Cobras fall to the ground, and he and Scarlet are safe. They go running into this control room, and there is Destro. Indeed, Scarlet, I told Cobra Commander, his diversion plan wouldn't fool you for long. And so, before they can capture Destro, he fires some adjustments that he's made to the power transmission dish. It is aimed at an uninhabited Pacific island, and he wants us to watch closely. with just a flick of the switch, this like fire beam comes flying out of the satellite and hits this island. This is a nice little panel on the bottom here. It's because there's a lot to you know, there's a lot to denote here. You're coming from outer space. You're shooting a laser. It's you also want to show the results of it, but you don't have a lot of time. They don't have a lot of space here, so it's there's concentric rings. That the first one is the actual dish itself, and the way that the blast breaks that ring, but then is stopped by the other panel's concentric ring, which is the same. It's parallel with the dish ring, and then on the page itself, a larger version of the beam is hitting the island. So it's like it's like this progression panel. It's pretty neat actually, and the island goes up in flames. So now we're on the next page. Holy Nova! Every living thing's been wiped out. So apparently there was living life on there. And Destro basically says, yeah, we're going to do this to a city unless you surrender. Duke calls Moondancer real quick, though, and he says, destroy that transmission dish, which is hilarious that you have to tell the guy that you just saw shoot a death beam, like, go get that dish. And Destro's caught unaware. He's like, no, don't tell him to. So he calls Red Wolf, Destro calls Red Wolf, and he says, protect the dish. Again, you have to tell these guys this. Now, when you look closely in this drawing, Red Wolf appears to be Wild Weasel. And when I click on the website, Red Wolf is not Wild Weasel. He is more of a... it's funny, he looks like a Star Wars figure in this. But he's got like actually kind of a Darth Vader face, but there's he looks cool. Don't get me wrong. He's got like hoses coming out of his face mask with this weird preliminary version of Darth Vader helmet is what it looks like. It looks like the those versions of Vader that you saw by the artist who was the Star Wars artist. I'm blanking on his name right now. McQuarrie. It looks like a version of McQuarrie's Darth Vader helmet slapped onto this figure, and he doesn't look like a posable 3 3/4 either. He looks like a Star Wars figure. That's fascinating. You know what I mean? Where he's just got the shoulder joints, the hip joints. I don't think he's a posable 3 3/4 figure at all. I think he is in the Star Wars mold. That's wild. Like he could be like the body of an Imperial something or other. Anyway, in the comic book, it's drawn to look like Wild Weasel. He's even got the ascot and everything. So maybe they updated him later on. Maybe this is the 84 version because Wild Weasel, wasn't he 85? Yeah. So he looks like Wild Weasel now, but apparently he's Red Wolf, and he and Moondancer are fighting. Destro lunges to hit the laser and destroy a city, and Robo-Skull loses the game of chicken that he's playing with Moondancer. So there's Robo-Skull crashes into the dish. The dish goes crazy. Quick time jump. Cobra Commander is making his escape in a snake armor, and they call it. He just calls it thanks to my escape armor, but there's a different name for it. They don't call it the snake armor in this. I forget what it was. We talked about it last week. Meanwhile, they just let Destro and Major Blood just kind of skate out. Like, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not Major Blood, it's Scrap Iron. They just kind of let Destro and Scrap Iron kind of skate out because Duke and Scarlet are busy with shutting down the death beam. So they make their escape. Robo-Skull lives to fight another day, terrorize another day. The shuttle escapes with Destro and Blood and the Baroness and all that stuff. Meanwhile, Moondancer finally gets off his shot at the satellite dish, and all's well that ends well. Scarlet smiling over Duke's shoulder. She says, "Looks like it'll be a while before the orbital power station comes online, Duke." And he says, "Dead right, Scarlet. And next time we'll make quite sure that it's been made totally Cobra-proof." The end. That was a lot of fun. Again, going back to the beginning, Cobra never really made any demands. He just said, "Here's what I'm doing," and I guess it was again to distract them. But then they promptly got caught unawares. So I don't know how well that worked. Cobra Commander making his escape. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Cobra Commander was never on the thing. That's what was confusing me. He makes his escape in the snake armor from the power station. He was still at the power station. So that's what he escaped. And he never was on the... I mean, he had to be, right? Like, because he can't be escaping from space in the snake armor. Like, what is... How is... Anyway, there's lots of questions to be had here. But it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun. I like seeing this Cobra, this Robo-Skull. Welcome to Joe and Joe Robo-Skull. I know a lot of you are like, we've known that's really cool for a long time. But welcome. And Moon Dancer / whoever you were, Grunt. Very cool. And Joe's going to space and they blow stuff up. So very much an animated adventure. With Rule of 3, you got 3 little, setup, battle commercial, and then final battle in space. So this would have easily worked as as an episode of the cartoon for sure. I dig it. I like it. I like the art. It's fun. I like the gray tones. Very Mad Magazine. I kept waiting for like a Mort Drucker, something to happen there. The next story in this is Danger 20,000 Feet. And that is a traditional war one. It's not a G.I. Joe one. I'll check that out myself. And then we get to, for next week, we talk about, there's some, they've got some Xeroxes, but the blueprints. So the G.I. Joe blueprints are in here. And so it's for the Sky Striker and the Water Moccasin and the Assault Pod. Then there's another non-Joe story. But then next week, what we're going to talk about, there's some color pages here is where we get introduced to Ton Up. And we'll talk a little bit next week about some of the sticker differences on some of these stories, which are pretty neat. No G.I. Joe, no G.I. Joe. And then, where is it? Towards the end here. I saw it. There it is. It's red tinted. It's like a red tinted ink page. So it's like a 2-color print. And it's a Snake Eyes story. So next week we got a Snake Eyes story called Snake Hunt. We're going to get into. And then that would wrap up the Action Force stuff. Because there's no more real G.I. Joe stuff in here story-wise after that. Action Force-wise, So yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun. Hope you guys are enjoying it. Love hearing from you. Let me know. And now you Joe. And Joeing is half the battle.